channel or welcome back to my channel. My name is Andy, sometimes Mouse, and I talk about books and book-related things. And today, I am happily giving you the wrap-up for 2025. It's done, it's completed, she's read a lot. I will give the caveat that I did read a lot, but less than I have before, so, you know. And I expect next year to be really low numbers, so I feel really happy with what I've got done. Clear Your Shit knocked out a ton of ebooks that I just owned and hadn't read, so yeah, I'm really excited about that. I want to give some disclaimers, some notes, thoughts, etc. I've noticed on the online sphere that we are talking per usual around this time of year, but it almost seems a little more aggressive. We are talking about people's reading numbers and how they feel unrealistic, or they feel competitive, or they feel like people aren't actually reading to enjoy books, but they are reading them in order just to consume books. To that point, I say, why do you watch reality TV? And I say that as a reality TV watcher. I want to disclaim before I talk about all of the books that I've read, because it is a big number. I want to disclaim I work from home, which means that while I am working on Excel sheets or whatever I do at my job that I will not disclose, I am able to listen to audiobooks at the same time. I also have pretty gnarly ADHD, and so my brain works pretty fast processing audio. It's why I struggle with watching things without subtitles, because they aren't talking fast enough for my brain to remember what they're saying. So I do listen to my audiobooks on a faster speed. I don't do this to compete. I don't do this to consume more books than anyone else. I do this because silence is terrifying, and I never want to experience silence ever. Ever. I also am, at the time of filming this, 7 months pregnant. I don't sleep very much anymore, and when I can't sleep, instead of scrolling on my phone, getting on TikTok, etc., I read books on my Kobo. I've made videos before about how I'm able to read as much as I am, and I think some of it has changed because I don't necessarily read as much as I used to, but I have made videos talking about the topic, and at the end of the day, it really comes down to, what are you willing to dedicate your time to? And I also want to give one last caveat before we talk about these stats. Nobody come at me about making little side notes, disclaimers, etc., okay? I think that it needs to be said in a very gentle and kind way. If you read one book this year, or you read 800 books this year, you did a great job. If you read a book that you already owned and had been sitting on your bookshelf for 100 years, and that's literally the only thing you've read this year, you did a great job. I don't talk about my stats to make anyone compare themselves to me. I talk about my stats because, one, I think they're interesting, and two, that's kind of part of the gig, right? Like, that's kind of part of being a booktuber. So again, if you read only one book, I think you did a great job. All right, let's talk about stats. To that note, I read 800 books this year. No, I'm just kidding. Let's talk about the stats. I read a total of 329 books this year. Most of them I feel like I read in the last 2 months for Clear Your Shit. It was a little bit crazy. For pages read, which if you don't know, and this is the first video or first wrap-up you've ever watched from me, I only count like actual pages read. So digitally or print. Those are the only stats I count. I don't, like, if I'm listening to an audiobook, also put the pages in of what that ebook would be. I don't do that. I don't know if other people, I don't know. I don't do that. But the total number of pages read was 54,095. The total of audiobook hours listened is actually so long that it is only in this format. 81 days, 16 hours, and 20 minutes worth. My average days per book is 2.3. My average books per month is 28, so not too bad. My not too bad, whatever, who cares. My average pages per day is 157.77. I expected it to be in about the 150 range, because just like looking at past stats while I was putting this together, I was like, that makes sense. And then my average audiobook hours per day is 7 hours, 21 minutes, and 15 seconds. Again, this lines up with what I understand from my own stats. My average rating for the entire year was a 3.6. Solid, middle of the road, lines up. This year, in previous years, I had made an effort to kind of just read things I really found interesting. And this year I went back to reading some things for challenges, rereading terrible books, reading TikTok romance books for videos, all of those things. And so that brought my rating down. I also just had ebooks that had been sitting in my ebook library for a very long time, and it was finally time to get those read. And that also brought that number down quite a bit, just because they were books that I got in like 2021 and just like forgot about. So yeah, which is wild when you run Clear Your Shit. Like, that's a crazy thing for me to say. Anyway, I purchased a total of 14 books this year and spent $172.77. I wanted to say this doesn't include children's books, but I only bought one children's book. And I don't think this includes some of the nonfiction birthing books that I've bought, because pregnant. I don't think I included that just because my husband and I are both reading them, so I don't necessarily, and like we're both buying them, so I don't necessarily know if that counts as like a purchase. I mean, it does, but it's not this stuff, you know? I don't know. That's how I feel about it. I checked out a total of 217 library books, which saved me $4,530.37. We love saving money. That's almost $5,000 that I might have, like, I could have ended up using on normal things. That's crazy. For the formats of those books, 16 of them were print, which made up 5% of my reading. 153 of them were digital, which made up 46% of my reading, and 161 of them were audiobooks, which made up 49% of my reading. I'm actually kind of surprised by the audiobook and ebook split. Normally, my audiobooks is like 60-70%, and then everything else is much lower. So I'm kind of surprised. I'm not mad. Not mad. I've been reading a lot more with my eyes. Again, it's because now that I'm pregnant, my sleep is like completely fucked, and so I read at night a lot. And I got my Kobo in May, and I think that made a huge difference too to my ebook reading. So here we are. For intended audiences, 207 of those books were adult, which made up 63% of my reading. 26 of them were children's or middle grade books, which made up 8% of my reading. And 97 of them were young adult, which made up 29% of my reading. So for those of you who are like, children's books don't count, well, my reading's still high, so fight me. I don't know why I'm so aggressive today. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. For fiction to nonfiction, 319 of the books that I read this year were fiction, which made up 94% of my reading. This makes sense. I'm not a huge nonfiction reader. And 20 of the books that I read this year were nonfiction, which made up 6% of my books. And considering I wanted to read one nonfiction book a month, and that's still my goal, it was a goal in a previous year, and it's a goal this year, I'm happy with this. Like, it means that I read more than one, almost 2 nonfiction books a month. So, I don't hate it. For genres, and we will talk about genres a little bit when I do my book blanket wrap-up video. That video is not coming out until March, though. No, that video I think comes out next week. Does it come out next week? I think it comes out next week. Or it came out before this. I don't know. I don't know anymore. I read 28 sci-fi books, which made up 8% of my reading, 119 fantasy books, which made up 36% of my reading. This makes sense, I'm a fantasy reader. Horror is my favorite genre, but I'm picky about it, you know? 36 books were romance, which made up 11% of my reading. That's a crazy number, because I don't like romance. 17 books were historical, which made up 5% of my reading. 25 books were thriller or mystery books, which made up 8% of my reading. 69 were horror books, and that made up 21% of my reading. 5 books were classics, which made up 2% of my reading, and 11 books were contemporary, which made up 3% of my reading. One of my goals this year was to read a classic book every other month. I didn't completely succeed that goal because in November and December I did not read a classic for Clear Your Shit because I felt like it wasn't applicable. So outside of that exception, I think I did a good job because I don't like classics. Was I reading mostly children's classics books? Maybe. But it was worth it. My sources for the books. So I'm going to mention something called free source. And when I'm talking about free source, it's things like review copies, Kobo Unlimited, Kindle Unlimited, which I no longer have Kindle Unlimited, but before it was Kindle Unlimited. Kindle Unlimited, gifts, ebooks that I managed to, like books that I managed to borrow from people and I forgot to mark as borrowed. That's where the free source comes from. I don't want anybody to think that, like, I don't know. We're not getting into that topic. We're not getting into that topic, but I'm just going to preface with that. So, 4 books that I read, where I got them. From my own TBR, meaning I owned it already and it wasn't purchased this year. 8 of the books I read were from that category, which is 2%. 54 books I read this year were rereads, which made up 14%. 14 books were books I purchased this year, which made up 4%. 217 of the books I read this year were from the library, which made up 57% of my reading. Not shocking. 72 books were from that free source that we talked about, which is 19% of my reading. 5 books were gifts, which made up 1% of my reading. 12 books were borrowed, which made up 3% of my reading. And honestly, I forgot that borrowed was an option until recently. And 2 books were from Everand. This isn't accurate. This part's not accurate. I think I added Everand later on as well. And so it's probably, some of the free source books are probably also from Everand. Anyway, that's 1% of my reading. I'll do better next year about tracking that stuff better. Like, I'll do better about tracking that thing. Let's talk about reviews, like what my starred ratings were. 7 books were 1-star ratings. Which made up 2% of my reading. 17 were 2-star ratings, which made up 5% of my reading. 106 were 3-star reads, which made up 33%. 153 were 4-star reads, which made up 48%, and 39 were 5-star reads, which made up 12% of my reading. I think my rating has become more and more realistic as I continue to use Cowpile and also am pressuring myself to write reviews on a piece of paper. Not necessarily write them on Goodreads or anything like that, but just write them on paper so that I have them to reference for videos. I think that that's helping quite a bit. My reason for reading, and I need to next year add book jar because I'm going to be reading some books out of my book jar that I talked about in the January TBR. But my reason for reading, just for funsies, was 244 books, which was 75% of my reading. For YouTube videos specifically, that was 16 books, which made up 5% of my reading. For personal development, that was 5 books, which made up 2% of my reading. For any readathon, I almost said the readathon, like I'm just talking about Clear Your Shit, but actually I'm talking about Clear Your Shit and Sapphic September, the only 2 readathons I do. I read 61 books, which made up 19% of my reading. For book club, I read 3 books, which made up 1% of my reading. If you don't know, I'm in a real life book club that I go to in my neighborhood. And for buddy reads, it was 1 book. I don't even know what book it was. And that made up 0% of my reading. I don't know. What did I buddy read? I don't know. It was probably with Ollie. I have no idea what I was buddy reading. Anyway, let's talk about the dates that some of these books came out. I always think this is an interesting stat, especially since I introduced classics into my reading. These numbers are always kind of interesting. Books published between 1901 and 1990, I read 15, which made up 5% of my reading. For books published between 1991 and 2000, I read 14 books, which made up 4% of my reading. For 2001 to 2010, I read 12 books, which made up 4% of my reading. For 2011 through 2015, I read 10 books, which made up 3% of my reading. For 2016 to 2021, I read 69 books, again, which made up 21% of my reading. I swear to God, I'm an adult. And then for books published between 2022 and 2026, I read 219 books, which made up 64% of my reading. This makes sense, but it was just kind of interesting with the inclusion of classic books. For types of books, so prose, novellas, etc. I read 295 prose books, which made up 77% of my reading. I read 8 novellas, which made up 2% of my reading. I read 6 short story collections, which made up 2% of my reading. And then I read 21 graphic novels, which made up 5% of my reading. And I think it was mostly the Witch Chronicles. And I'm so glad that I finished them. Then for each month, how many books I finished each month, and what percentage that made up of my entire reading, and then this is going to be the end of the wrap-up. These are the last stats. January, I read 28 books, which was 9%. February, 22, 7%. March, 27, 8%. April, 23, 7%. May, 26, 8%. June, 30, 9%. That's when I got my Kobo, it was like right before that. July, 34, 10%. August, 23, 7%. I was in my first trimester. September, 21, 6%. Still in my first trimester. October, 25, 8%. This is about when I got medicated appropriately. November, 42, 13% of my reading. And then in December, I read 31 books, which made up 9% of my reading. So it was a good year. I had a good time reading. I read some interesting books. I read some very new to me books. I got some interesting books recommended to me. And I can't wait for 2026. I think it's going to slow down for me a lot, but that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. So I'm excited to see where it goes from here, what my stats look like from here. I am a little tempted to, now that it's been 5 years of me being on BookTube, I'm a little tempted to react possibly to some of my wrap-ups from previous years and see some of the things that I've said, but we'll see if I end up doing that. But that's going to be it. I'm going to go before my camera overheats or dies. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe and share. If you didn't, luckily I only make these once a year. Twice a year if you count the mid-year one. Okay, I'll give you that. If you liked this video though, let me know in the comments down below. And let me know if there's any stats that you wish I would be tracking, because I've still got some time to make some adjustments to the stats I'm tracking by the time this video comes out. I post videos every Tuesdays and Thursdays at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time, except by the end of March I will be going on maternity leave. So you guys won't see me for about a month, just as a heads up. But I will see you later on this week. Don't forget to take your meds and drink your water and do something today to take care of yourselves. Okay, thanks, bye.